The definition I came with on the right is using design, data, and technology to create sources of differentiated, sustainable growth with positive impacts for company, customers, and community. You might think that sounds impossibly vague and broad, but to me, that's what it is.
For those of you who don't know anything about today's keynote speaker, John Cutler. John has an extensive background as a product manager and coach. He currently works as product evangelist at Amplitude, where he coaches hundreds of current and future customers on being more impact focused. Through years of experience at different companies like Zendesk, AdKeeper, and RichFX, to name a few, he has cultivated a perspective that spans individual roles, domains, and products, enabling him to mix and match various methodologies to help teams deliver lasting outcomes for their customers. His viral enthusiasm has been heard at multiple events like QCon in New York City, Agile Lean in Ireland, UX Thailand, UX London, and at several other engagements. And we are very lucky to have him here with us today. Welcome, John.
Great. Thank you so much, everyone. So today I'm going to chat about product thinking, and I put it in quotation marks because I think that words like thinking and mindset often are used almost as weaponized against people in many cases. So I'm going to try to unpack this word product thinking, but I think it is a helpful frame. It's something that we can chat about. It will give us a number of themes to talk about. But specifically, we're going to talk about the idea of product thinking in companies that don't necessarily sell digital products. And I think this is an important distinction because many of the blog posts you read, or if you use Twitter, the people who post incessantly about product, or even books that you read like Marty Kagan's Inspired, we're traditionally in companies that sold digital products. So you can take this advice and sometimes you try to apply it in a larger company or a company that doesn't necessarily sell a digital product exactly, and it can be hard to relate exactly. And so some of the practices don't seem to line up. So today we're going to dig in for about 20, 25 minutes, and then we're going to open up for a lot of questions. And I think that's going to be the fun part. So the discussion will be fun, but hopefully what I'm going to do in this talk is prompt you a little bit and get people thinking to line up our questions so we can have a discussion. So the theme of today's talk is product thinking in non-digital product companies. And I will share this mural board afterwards. Florian suggested I not share it to a couple hundred people in the middle, otherwise to risk another crash to do it. So there's one person viewing, and I think they're viewing it to do the screen share. So in research for this particular talk, as sometimes I do, I pose the question to lots of people. What are some actual specific behaviors we would associate with someone who's good at this product thinking, this mythical, magical product thinking? What would we actually observe? It would almost be like saying, what would we observe if people had the agile mindset? Same kind of idea, but in this case, product thinking. Specific enough that someone without a lot of tacit knowledge would be able to say, that's happening. Now, I will not bore you with all of these particular answers, but I had, I got 150 answers to what they think product thinking would look like. And I'll leave you this link so you could browse this later, but, some I just wanted to point out very briefly. I like this one, can we versus should we? We'd observe them asking, should we, before can we? Well, that's kind of an interesting idea. The second one is a sense of possibilities. With digital products, they're probably more aware than others about what's possible with data design and technology. That was interesting. Some others that stood out to me. One is unpack problems into distinct problems. So when given a problem, they would notice that it's 4 problems rolled into one. Well, that's pretty universal skill. That's probably more universal problem solving than it is product thinking, but you get the idea where people are going. This one said opportunity cost mental model. We'd observe them having a keen sense of the time value aspect of value creation. So instead of viewing the investment as developer time, which is very, very common, they view the investment as the potential outcomes they could have achieved during that time period. So you can see where this is going. There's a little bit of this kind of opportunity cost thinking or entrepreneurial thinking versus, how much time will developers spend on it, or, will they use story points or something like that. Last two that came to mind, one here, seek commercial viability. So there is this kind of entrepreneurial idea that crops up in a lot of these particular answers. And then finally, bias to get out of the building, connecting with customers. So there's many of these. I'll leave you a link so you can browse these later. I think it's a very good tool if you're, a coach internally, and you're trying to demystify some of these ideas of product thinking. But this was my research. I always think, start with a little bit of research for the talk. Let me summarize some of the themes for you. I'll do that over here, so that we can, I can extract some of the themes for you. So the first one, many of these answers relate to a sense, sort of an entrepreneurial sense, where in addition to kind of usable software or, it fulfills the definition of done for a particular user story, there's this sense that it's contributing to kind of some commercial success or business outcome. That's a very common theme. Other ones, this sense of a long-lasting effort. So thinking very much beyond the idea of a project, right? Thinking beyond this idea of we might spend 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years thinking about improving this thing. A customer focus, a value focus. There's a very common theme here around creative problem solving. And many of the answers could be related to general problem solving, which seems kind of silly because we'd all, of course, we're solving problems at work, but that incessant question of why. Why are we doing this? What is the real problem? And as we all know from our work, everyone says we'll give, one team defines the problem and the other team defines the solution. But in all product work, you're never done defining the problem. Every problem is a solution to a higher level problem, is a solution to a higher level problem. So many of these answers relate to basically asking why, unpacking a problem, understanding it. An outcome orientation. What impact is it having out in the world? Experimentation friendliness, the ability to ship something and then remove it. I always ask teams, what was the last feature you removed from the product? And this depends, in many organizations, it's like, well, why would we ever remove something until its end of life? I mean, that's crazy. And then in other organizations, it's like, oh yeah, we routinely remove things from the product. So you can see some of the difference there. Mid to long-term view, so that product building is very much like making a garden, in that sense that there's definitely things you can do in the short term, but you're building the foundations for sustainable, differentiated growth. And that kind of links to that entrepreneurial idea. So there's this idea of thinking big, working small, and that's in a lot of the themes. There's a couple more. I think one I wanted to point out specifically, and we'll talk about it more in the talk, is fewer or better proxies. This will be a theme for a lot of the talk of what I think I've narrowed down one of the key themes here, and it's around the use of what really is a proxy and how we use it. So if you look at a lot of the themes in the product thinking, they relate to proxies. And then finally is this idea of leverage, that a product thinker is thinking, how can 1 + 1 = 3? How can we create more? How can we create more than something that's more than just a sum of its parts? So these are some themes. Now, the reason why I want to mention these, it does not matter whether you work in a digital product company that sells a digital product like Intuit or something, or, I work at a company called Amplitude. Anheuser-Busch is a customer of ours. And even though they're working in logistics, they're still applying many of these ideas. So the reason I bring these up is, does not matter whether you're selling a digital product or not specifically, all of these particular ideas relate in any particular environment. So I tried to also sum up in my words, what does it mean to sort of be product centric or product led, or to have product sense or product thinking? The definition I came with on the right is, using design, data, and technology to create sources of differentiated, sustainable growth with positive impacts for company, customers, and community. You might think that sounds impossibly vague and broad, but to me, that's what it is. It's really, you understand the tools of the trade, which are design, data, and technology, and many other different things. And you're trying to create sources of sustainable differentiated growth. So in large non-digital product companies, I'll ask an engineering leader, how are you using design, data, and technology to create sources of sustainable different growth with positive impacts? And to me, that's really the heart of what we might call product thinking. Now, I'll show you a bunch of diagrams that I've used over the last couple years to try to hammer this point home. So in this particular diagram, it's like all models, it's wrong. Don't worry. I know this looks very linear and it's not linear and it should be loops and there should be many things going on. But along the top here, we see some traditional sort of phases, for lack of a better word. So you see opportunity selection, requirements planning, design, build, test, release, and run. What I like about this visual is it talks about the last 20 or 30 years for those of you who've been involved in doing this, right? So we start off with handoffs between groups of people, between each of these stages, all along the top. So, the word waterfall is so thrown around, it's almost impossible to use it anymore. But for lack of a better word, there's boundaries between teams and there's handoffs between teams, and it's a very sequential view. Now, what we see in kind of early Agile idea is that build and test start to create a boundary of some group of people. And even then, there's a little bit of a handoff. So the purple arrows are handoffs. And you can see this progress. We won't go at length in this particular thing, but I think that one of the themes of today is the idea of better or different proxies and sort of how teams are working together. And you can see that over time, we go from Agile, able to release, suddenly we add their ability to release. Then we throw a designer into the team. But you know what? The designer is making mock-ups and throwing them over the wall. They just happen to be in the team. And then we say, oh, there's DevOps. The team can run what they build. So you see the boundary build here. We have one of our classic loops. You have to draw loops on everything related to Agile because, of course, everything's loops. And then you have this little mini handoff right there. So it's kind of in the team, but it's running. And then we have what I would call kind of the feature factory, where someone decides the opportunity. You might have a product manager who does some requirements gathering or planning, and they throw it over the wall. So you see this little mix here. And then finally, down here at the bottom, you have this idea of a product team, different variations of a product team, but for lack of a better thing, the boundary of opportunity selection, that kind of entrepreneurial unit, extends to the team boundary, for lack of a better word. Now, of course, this is in a large organization. This is highly simplified. You have platform teams, you have other teams operating like this, you have teams of teams, you have different combinations of things. But what I wanted you to get from this is that the theme that we're talking about for this idea of product thinking is progressively removing boundaries and creating a cohesive problem-solving unit that's kind of entrepreneurial and independent in some ways. So there's that element. There's sort of a team formation idea to it. Now let's get to the heart of what you'll see as a theme here. But as I looked at the responses, what I really realized is that product thinking is largely about working with better or fewer proxies. So here's what I mean. I don't know, I've been doing this maybe 23 years or whatever. There was a time when I would work with someone called the benefits realization manager. And it was very sequential. We would finish our project and then hand it off to a team that would try to run the thing and then get the benefits out. But when we think about product thinking, we're thinking about shifting the proxies for our work. So instead of a proxy of a project being done, we're replacing that with a better proxy. So maybe some kind of positive outcome signal. Instead of the proxy of a story point, We are shifting that to the idea of some kind of usage or value exchange. Instead of the idea as a product owner as the customer proxy, the team is connecting directly to customers. Instead of thinking about shipping something to all customers, we're thinking about a specific group of customers. Instead of, if you work, closely with the marketing team in your organization, instead of thinking about conversions, we dropped someone on a landing page and they signed up, we're thinking about whether that customer has retained, whether they have high customer lifetime value, that they're with us. I always joke, it's funny because in telecom, someone said that we can predict exactly how much money you'll make out of any new customer. And then what I said is that, well, that's very interesting, but that puts you kind of in a commodity space. Like ideally you want to have a situation where you're able to move that lever. You can retain them more. So that's an interesting thing for telecom. And I'm just giving you examples here. The point I'm trying to make is that if you just understand the principle of what I'm saying, which is product thinking is largely about removing the proxies that we've normally created and replacing them with better ideas of value, of problem solving, of a job well done, of contributing to benefits for the company. The way that I put this in a tweet, and I've been thinking about this for a while, so this is from 2019, I said, count the hops between the team and the users, the customers, sales and marketing, each other, the budget, the data, the strategy, whether they can deploy into production, product-like environments, hiring tools. So if we think take a sort of lean view of this and imagine that anything a team is doing might involve hops. So, some business person at the company has talked to a big customer, they tell someone else, they tell the PMO tells the engineering leader tells this other person, who tells another person, who tells another person, another person. And then about 8 people later, you have a developer sitting there thinking about something. That's 8 hops. That's 8 or 9 hops. And so what we think about is that, again, this is to go back to the theme. The central theme here is all of these present opportunities for more product thinking, which is removing the proxies that we create to bring the team closer to customers, the team closer to the people they're helping, even internally. If you're helping sales and marketing, are you able to sit beside sales and marketing? The team closer to their budget, instead of a budget decided 3 years in advance, the team has more insight into their budget and what they're operating around. So you can see this as a central theme. And when we do the Q&A, I'll probably challenge folks to ask you about where there are more proxies than less proxies. Now, a proxy is not necessarily a bad thing. We proxy things all the time. You're never able to perfectly know whether what you've shipped has had value, but this is the central theme. If you think about it on a high level, what we're talking about with product thinking is ingraining business thinking and entrepreneurial thinking as a unit into how we're developing software, delivering digital experiences, et cetera. So if you can imagine, this is sort of a 20-year history lesson to folks at different points, right? So, at the top here, we have customers interacting with the business making requests of IT giving the business stuff, and the business giving customers stuff. So that's how we've operated for a long time. And now what you're observing out in the world, right, is they're taking IT and just rebranding it product. Every projects are now products, but has it really changed? This is the question. Has anything really changed? I tell you one thing, if you want budget, just call what you're doing a product. Works every time. Maybe that's the lesson here in product thinking, is that when you need budget, just say what you're making is a product, and then everyone, gives you money. So in this sense, the next stage is customers give the business something, business is now giving this product thing something, the product is giving the business something, the business is giving the customers. When we talk about product thinking, what we're talking about is combining the sense of a business-minded group who understands the power of design, data, and technology that can move itself close enough to the customer. So the reason why I'm showing this again is this idea of proxies. In the topmost example, the business is proxying the customer's request to IT. The second example, the business is proxying the request of the customers to now something called product. Of course, the PMO has to sit right here still. They're still trying to find their identity right there. And then in this final example, you see we've removed that proxy. We've tried to bring the problem solvers closer to the customers. So I'll give you another example. I discussed this thing called mandate levels. Here's another way to view product thinking. So if you imagine a range of what I would call mandates. So level A is it build exactly this to a predetermined specification. So it's SHA, I need 3 pixel radius button, and it needs to do this, and this is exactly how it's going to work. And as we go down this particular list, you can see that the mandate level increases. So B is build something that does a specific behavior, input or output. C builds something that lets a segment of customers complete some task. It feels very user story-like or epic-like, right? That kind of fits in there. D, solve a more open-ended customer problem. E, explore the challenges of and improve the experience for a segment of users. F, increase, decrease a metric known to influence a specific business outcome. G, explore various leverage points. H, directly generate a short-term business outcome. And I, generate a long-term business outcome. So the interesting thing here is to ask yourself, where are the team boundaries? So what you observe in many settings is that what we're calling product in a lot of non-digital product companies is basically a box right here. And the business, the quote unquote business, is here. So the teams are making usable software. They've got designers, maybe they're even doing discovery. They're using Teresa Torres's opportunity solution tree. They're making, mildly useful software. What we see with more product thinking in an organization is that the boundaries begin to shift and expand further down this particular thing. So you start to see an example here that I've drawn. You start to see the boundary of the team in terms of the responsibility it's taking shifting. And then you actually start to see models like this, where you have teams that look a little bit more like this, right? So collaborative kind of, there's people who understand the business domain, and then there's people who understand what to do with data design and technology, and out, so you do this. So an example would be, when you adopt more sort of product thinking ideas, is that the team might legitimately be tackling challenges, almost maybe even to generate a business outcome, that they're really moving down this particular chart. So what we're seeing, and I draw the arrows, is it's basically a shift in terms of mandate, in terms of problem solving. So that's one aspect of product thinking. Okay, back to more ideas of proxies. So when we see more product thinking, and again, it doesn't matter what environment. It can be digital product company, it can be non-digital product company. Another thing that we're doing in these particular environments is that we're converging later instead of earlier. So instead of the idea of analysis kind of driving into a solution, and then you've got development and ship, there's more divergence initially. We're converging later, and we're moving down. So again, what is this doing, right? This is moving the team closer to the customer, closer to the problem, closer to the idea that so what I'm trying to get at here is that in this top model, this becomes the proxy. Done is the proxy for value. In this bottom example, we're creating value over time. We don't have a similar proxy, right? moving along these particular things. Similar particular environment, I'll just talk briefly about this, is that if we see more product thinking in an environment, you see a team dedicated to moving a particular metric or a particular outcome over a period of time. So instead of taking the projects and saying, well, what's the success criteria for that project? The next project, what's the success criteria for that project? What you'll see is a team placing a number of bets that have an impact on some kind of key result over many quarters, over a period of time. So again, back to the theme that I'm getting at, instead of the proxy being done, or instead of the proxy being some weird OKR at the end of the quarter, if you're using OKRs, some teams are doing that, we remove that proxy. We think about the impact of this work over time. So you can see how these themes play out. Here's another way to think about proxies. We'll wrap up soon for the questions, which I think will be really fun, is that, I always go to teams and I ask them to play what I call the random Jira ticket game. And so to play the random Jira ticket game, you go and you find one ticket that a developer is working on, and you say, keep trying to tie this up to a business outcome and see how far you get. So again, this is about proxies. So what do we want to see? We want to see we're working on this ticket to predictively autofiltrate details, we'll improve efficiency, we'll retain larger accounts, increase revenue, you can see how they're building a tree that removes the proxies. So it's not like the developer is saying, I don't know, I'm finishing this ticket to deliver this feature and achieve the definition of done. In this example, in a sort of, when you're adopting more product thinking, you're seeing that every team member is able to build this tree of outcomes. So basically kind of removing these artificial proxies. Now, it doesn't mean that finishing the ticket isn't important at some level, but what we see is that their ability to do this kind of lateral thinking, kind of get through the particular problem. Couple more drawings, and then we'll wrap up and we'll do some questions. I'm very curious to chat with people about these things. Actually, we'll skip this particular slide because it's pretty complex. So what we see in an environment, and again, it doesn't matter whether it's digital product company or non-digital product company, is sort of this shift, right? So here is the feature factory. In a feature factory, how does that work? In a feature factory is basically like software development as a factory. Build this, the team gets that request, and they deliver stuff. Now, one thing that's very interesting is people have said to me, is the feature factory bad, John? Isn't that great? We're building features. It's a feature factory. And my point to them is, I guess on some level, if they're moderately usable features, and you're building them, maybe it's not the end of the world. But what we're starting to see is the shift away from that particular model, even in large environments. And so where a lot of companies are at the moment, in fact, is this sort of strange middle ground, right? Where they want to adopt more goal setting like OKRs or other techniques. And the team is moderately aligning its work around outcomes, but they still aren't very clear about how their work is really contributing to the bigger picture. They're still not extremely clear. Again, there's just a lot of proxies in the way. Teams, what are you going to ship this quarter? Well, this project, this project, this project, this project. Okay, well, given those projects, what's your outcome? So in some ways, what we've done is in this organization, they've changed the feature factory and they've replaced it with what I would call the outcome factory, which is just very short-term goals. So is that better or worse than the feature factory? I don't know. If you're a short-term outcome factory, is that good? I think there's room for improvement. So what we start to see in a kind of more, product thinking type model is that we see teams aligned around actionable inputs that they can control for multiple quarters, multiple years. And those, they're working small down here. They're running. It's not like they're not making goals. They're making goals. You see time-based goals. But they're able to connect their work and the experiments they're running to actionable inputs and to something like a North Star metric or something where they can see and invest that work over time. And so this is a big challenge. You see, teams shifting to OKRs, and you say to them, well, what's your team's mission or vision? And I'll say, well, I don't know. We're trying to be agile. That's why we shift everything we're doing every quarter. And I kind of scratch my head and I say, is that really being agile? It sounds like you don't have a strategy. It sounds like you're just a feature factory. That doesn't seem very agile to me. What problem are you trying to solve? Because most problems in companies do not change every quarter. The problem remains pretty stable. How we solve the problem and the capabilities that we build over time change. But it doesn't change every single week, what you're doing to those things. So this kind of model is really about replacing proxies. And I'll leave you with two thoughts before we jump to questions. I like this analogy of kind of the shift from this sort of factory line to something more like a farm or a garden, right? So just because you have a farm does not mean you can't go and plant a tree here tomorrow. Every day you have to wake up in the morning, the farm, and do something. Right? You're trying to make a sustainable source of growth. You're trying to create something sustainable that's resilient over time. So you might have a goal to create a thriving farm for 3 decades and still go and fix this fence. There's still work to do. So to me, this more than ever kind of typifies what product thinking means in this particular environment. In the product thinking, we're thinking about sustainable, differentiated growth over longer periods of time. The work we're doing in the day, week, month range are just today's temporary solutions to long-standing problems. They will fix that fence tomorrow, and the fence will break in another year, and they'll put a better fence, or they'll use one irrigation system 1 year for their farm, and then in 5 years they'll figure out another irrigation. So I really like that visual metaphor for how we're doing it. Leave you with the final thought on this is that I wrote this post called 12 Signs You're Working in a Feature Factory. And this was in 2016. I was very angry. I wanted to, I was like, no one likes to work in a feature factory. And, what does it mean to work in a feature factory? There's things like no measurement, you shuffle teams, there's success theater. You don't really acknowledge when things don't work. There's no connection to metrics. You can see I made this list. I will say 6 years later, here's the problem. I didn't say why any of this matters. I just listed the problems. And if I was going to say 6 years later why this matters, and it can be in any particular environment, it really matters because there are incredible opportunities to use design, data, and technology to create sources of differentiated, sustainable growth in any company. And the reason why the feature factory is wrong is because you're not getting the most creativity, you're not doing the best problem solving, you're not taking the most entrepreneurial approach to create impact for your community and your customers and your teams, and different people. So all these things are true. This was a very, funny post, I list all these things, but the reason why any of this was important is because we are trying to create a sustainable business and we're trying to use design, data, and technology in interesting ways. And we do need to work small and think big, and there's a number of reasons why to do that. So I will stop sharing my screen and we'll jump to some questions, but hopefully that gives you a sort of, rapid fire sense of the word product thinking, and especially in non-digital product companies, maybe some of the principles in a way that people can relate to it. And once I close this, I'll copy the Miro board link and I'll share it with you if that will help with questions. So let me try this maneuver and hopefully there's no crash. If there's a crash, I'll be back in 2 minutes and we can have coffee. Okay, so stop. Okay, we're back to that. That's success number 1.
Thank you, John. Wow.
Yeah.
A good impulse there. Wow, a very packed. My mind is racing in all kinds of directions right now, to be honest. But yeah, let's start with the questions. The first one we have here is the most voted question. What would be the first step to take for an organization that is stuck on the earlier phases of Agile? So, you showed this table with there was just build and test and then later phases. So what do you think would be the first step that an organization should take to move towards product thinking?
Yes. Okay, now I can use my other diagram, the one that was crazy, but I'll share my screen for a second.
Sure.
And hopefully it doesn't crash. Okay. So I have asked myself this question a lot. And if you can see my screen, let's go back to this particular diagram. This is sort of like a mental map that I have for how teams are functioning. Now, I think what happens is that many times, someone will read something like Marty Kagan and will say, we just need to empower teams. We just need to give them agency. Everything will be okay after that. I've been thinking about that and saying, is that really, is requesting to annotate the shared content? No, I'm going to decline Katya for a second, just so I don't crash my machine, if that's okay. And then we can, yeah, so someone requested that I think they can annotate my screen, but I'll say no for now. So the challenge, I think, in a larger organization is that often the organizational structure and the architecture are creating dependencies that make that agency very, very difficult. Or the way that projects are funded creates incentive alignments that reinforces an organizational structure that creates dependencies that makes that agency very difficult. Or there's no committed to working at Amplitude, which works on analytics, because I truly believe that many people in the organization have never realized that the things, 60% of the things that you're delivering never work. 80%, 50%, even really good teams I know are at 50%. Things just don't work the way you think. And some things work really, really well, and you might not know. So I think that the first step when teams are trying to move that is get some kind of situational awareness about whether the work that you're doing is having that kind of mid to long-term impact. Is it what's working? The reason why I say that is it's like inviting an executive to a usability testing session or something. Like, some of these people have never put two and two together that their ideas don't work. So that's one thing that every team can do. So I think that my theory is that when you create situational awareness coupled with the beginnings of something like an actual product strategy, those two things together, that first step, then the problem is that your organizational structure probably still doesn't match the strategy. Okay, let's accept that that's going to be a problem. But once you get the two things going, you start to create impulses where you might change incentives alignments a little bit. The strategy may be able to inform a different organizational structure slightly. You'll be able to do some re-architecting, some dependency reduction, slowly build confidence. And even if you don't get the 100% product team at first, you might drive a little focus, reduce WIP. You might reduce a little bit of optionality because people see the stuff they're doing doesn't work. You might improve decision quality because situational awareness improves decision quality. If you know that 60% of the things that you build don't work, there's two ones. One, someone says, well, we have to plan for 3 years to figure it out. Hopefully someone doesn't say that. And they say the other thing, which is like, okay, maybe we need to think about this. So that's my theory here. My theory is that if you go head on to that team and say, you are empowered, and you're not really empowering them by reducing dependencies and giving them a product strategy, et cetera, and most importantly, giving them situational awareness, you're not really empowering them. You're actually making it very difficult for them. So that's my answer to that. Hopefully that helped.
Actually, that kind of reminded me of a keynote that happened a year ago. We had Simon Wardley here. And because the Wardley maps all talk about situational awareness and purpose and strategic clarity, right? Yeah. So that just reminded me of that. Fair. Thank you very much. Okay, moving on to the next question. What is your view on the relevance of data analytics in product management? How much should a good product manager do himself regarding data analytics?
Yeah, I'll try to take the unbiased view. I obviously work at one of those companies, but I disagree with some of the people at my own company sometimes. I mean, I think that, well, first of all, qualitative data is still data. Our past experiences are still data. Our intuition in some sense is data as well. So if we take a pretty holistic view of data, I think it's important to think about that. Here's what I've noticed. I think in 2021, I met with 130 teams doing workshops. I do workshops sometimes at large companies, did them, at IKEA and other places. It goes back to that situational awareness point, is that many people say, we've got to use analytics because we're going to find a magic metric, or we're going to make all our decisions and be 100% certain, or we're going to silence the hippo. There's this whole idea people have in their mind about analytics that somehow you snap your finger and suddenly make all these data-driven decisions and life is good and everything. That's not the reality with analytics. The reality with the analytics, it's like a muscle. And sometimes you need to measure to figure out what you're measuring is not right. Or sometimes you need to, it's almost like observability in DevOps, right? There's this sense of observability. You need to kind of know what's going on. There's a situational awareness aspect to it. So what I've observed is that you need access to the data. You should not have to sit and have to make a request for a poor analyst and 6 weeks later you get some report, because you'll never ask them again. Like people, the analytics teams will be like, we're actually good, we're staffed correctly. And then you go to the PM team and say, are you getting what you need? It's like, oh, no, I didn't want to bother them anymore. That poor team with only 3 people on it. I can't ask them questions anymore because I feel like I'm overwhelming them. I just don't worry about it anymore. And you go back to the analytics team, they're like, well, we're okay, actually. You know, our queue is okay. We don't have that many questions related. So I think that you need access to the data. You need access to like decent analysis tools, but it really is about building the muscle. It's about, with every effort you do, what is the status quo? What is the current behavior? Who is the who? Who are the human beings? What do we know about them? What are they doing right now? Where are we going to intervene? What is the opportunity? What does the data say about how we can improve the opportunity? How do we design our experiment? Here's our experiment. Let's ship our experiment. How are we going to measure our experiment? Here's what we know. Here's leading indicators. Here's trailing indicators. That's the loop you're looking for. That's the muscle. So I would answer the question by, it plays an absolutely critical role, but at a certain point with certain companies, it stops being something special. It's just how you work. You don't show up with a new product initiative without having done some qualitative and quantitative research. And you don't show up at a quarterly review without some idea of what's happening. So it just becomes part of how product managers work. So that's a muscle you need to build over time. The mistake is thinking you're going to jump in one day and get all the answers. I'd leave it with 1.2 is that there's measurement to control and there's measurement to learn. Many companies don't admit it, but what they want is they want the analytics to control, to proxy trust, to proxy confidence in the teams. They're not thinking about measurement to learn. And when you adopt the measurement to learn idea, you realize that a lot of the metrics, there's Tegman's law, right? Which says that anything that looks good is probably wrong. And that's what I love when I teach people in Amplitude, the product, you know, the company I work for, is you need a product that helps you prove that what you're looking at is wrong and then actually find out what's going on after that. So yeah, it's a muscle. You need to build it. It's a big part of product, but consider measurement to learn versus control, and don't try to proxy trust. And then build a muscle, not expect a magic metric. And that's usually a good technique.
John, we have a couple of more questions coming up. So I guess you gave a slight hint already. If you look and think of a product team, how should they learn product thinking, especially when this hasn't been on the top of their heads as they had different jobs for ages in the past? So what does drive that kind of different kind of thinking?
Yeah, I'll try to keep the answer short. Sorry, the coffee just kicked in. I will explain this with an example. I talked to a lot of companies, and I was talking to a product leader the other day who had just hired a 23-year-old new graduate into this company that we all, you know, it's sort of like a blog post company. You all read about it. And I said, well, there's a lot of product managers with the experience, you know, why this person? And they said, because they were taking a fresh mind to it, right? And then I asked, you know, like, well, you must be able to teach them very quickly. And they basically said, all of the product managers get in the reps. If you've worked somewhere for 10 years, but you ship things every year, and you never know whether anything worked, and you never have any contact with the customers, you're literally getting as much experience as a 23-year-old new graduate for that 1 year in a company that's shipping often, reviewing, framing its bets, reflecting, connecting directly with customers, learning that most of the stuff you ship doesn't work the first time, doing some discovery and doing that. So the reason why I'm making that point is, if your coach is in this environment, you have to create an environment where they get the, you know how in Agile we talk about in Jeff Patton's user story mapping, we think about the end-to-end view. That's the environment you need to create from a learning experience. Do not stop at the story point was shipped, you know, or don't stop at the story is done or that one feature is made. You have to get the product folks through that loop. And it's like Barry O'Reilly's book, Unlearn. I just actually don't think it's about this massive skill set. It's actually largely about unlearning all the habits you have as you do those particular things. So that's what I would say. Figure out how to get teams to have the reps, even if it's on the small. You don't need 50 customer interviews, maybe just 3. You don't need a huge bet with all these things. Maybe it's just a linear regression. Like, did anything change? Maybe it's not the huge product strategy. It's just a little mission statement. But like, can you get them through the loop is the way that you're going to get teams to adopt it. It's not a thinking problem. It's like a doing problem. Like, you need to get around the loop, is my take on that. Poor mom is getting my son to school. Okay, all right.
All right, thank you, John.
Yeah.
Next one here on the line is, as you talked about reducing proxies, what about the role of managers in there, moving to a more persistent or transparent model? That question comes from Patrick.
Yeah, I mean, there's people managers and then there's product managers, and we could probably take both of them. I mean, the role impact, the idea of the product manager as proxy goes way, way back. So, that takes kind of a slight change in thinking on the part of the product manager. Like, I'm not there to represent the customer. I always sort of say that to product managers. You are not there to represent the customer. You are not the customer. You are a context creator for problem solvers. That's what you're there for. And you're good at prioritization and sequencing and thinking about an entrepreneurial sense and all those particular things. So that's the sort of product manager view of the proxy. Can you become more of a context relayer, context creator versus a proxy for the customer? I think then the people manager, I don't know if it was about people management or about product management. Maybe we could jump to the next question, because I didn't want to talk about people management this morning.
Fair enough.
Sure, we can.
It's a whole other ball of wax, as you all know.
So someone liked the term of outcome factory as a feedback to you. Can OKR be the glue between short-term and long-term, like in your messy middle picture?
Yep. Yes, but remember, OKRs are a form of strategy deployment. They are not strategy. Now, if you laid out 1,000 OKRs on the floor and looked at them, maybe you could infer the strategy, but there are no assumptions on OKRs. There's no story on an OKR. They're nothing. They're just literally goals. And the whole idea, and let's just be realistic, in a place like Google, United States, highly individualistic, every team wanted to do their own thing. They put the OKRs on the table so they could battle it out and see if all the goals aligned. This is kind of what they were doing, right, to do it. So what I would say is that, remember, OKRs are not strategy. They are a way to kind of deploy strategy. And more importantly, they are a goal-setting method. They are not strategy, they're a goal-setting method. So that picture that I showed you where the line was going up over time and each quarter you were doing those things, the team could set, there's a difference between time-based goals like OKRs and like a persistent view of strategy and what you're doing. So I think that in the worst case, OKRs become literally like, okay, everyone, pack up the quarter to 110%, cross your fingers. We're doing OKRs. We're doing OKRs. Okay, we got to do our OKRs now and populate the software, the massive spreadsheet with 4,500 cells. Okay, wonderful. Okay, we've got our OKRs and run the quarter. There's a huge difference between that and basically teams saying, wow, we're going to spend the next 3 to 6 quarters really trying to move that thing. How do we break that down into more near-term goals? Like, what would that mean for this quarter? How am I going to set goals on that? So that's how I would answer it is, remember, just OKRs are not going to solve the problem. They're useful, but they could also be weaponized just the same as anything else. And even friends at Google were like, yeah, parts of Google OKRs are absolutely weaponized. So you can't solve the problem just with OKRs. You need to think about them in the context of a strategy and a mission. I'd much rather have a team that has a solid mission and vision and a strategy and can think big, work small, and doesn't use OKRs than a team that uses OKRs like an outcome factory, like thinking about every quarter like that.
Right. Thank you, John. All right. Do we have time for maybe one or two questions more? Let's see. From your experience, what stops companies to get rid of proxies, and what works from your experience to overcome this?
I mean, I think that when you are a maker, you're a designer, you're a developer, you're bought into this world, you're in this sort of agile world, we take for granted how many things we hold to be true. Now, we've seen it work, but there's a lot of people in the agile and product community too who just believe it works. They've never seen it work, actually. They just believe it because they buy into this religion, they buy into this idea of things happening. But they've never seen it work, frankly, or they saw it work at like 10 companies ago and they haven't seen it since then to do the particular thing. So the first thing that comes to mind is that you need to create boundaries to demonstrate how these techniques can really do something for the business on a meaningful level. I had a huge debate on LinkedIn with someone where I said, just forget about, it's one of the classic posts, like forget about Agile, what's the business about? A lot of people have done those posts, but someone was, vehemently defending, they're like, actually, my job is the Agile transformation. I partner with the business, but my job is doing the Agile transformation or the product transformation. And I kept saying, well, why? Why does your company need to do this? To innovate. Why does it need to innovate? To innovate. Did you innovate 10 years ago? Yes, we innovated 10 years ago. No, why do you need to do it? We need to ship things faster. I'm like, oh, okay, now the reality is out to do these particular things. So I'm sorry, I got distracted and they were having trouble getting into the car and I'm in my garage. So I'm not sure if I'm answering this question correctly. I'm just being transparent to do these things. But I think that in the setting of a larger company, it really is show, don't tell. Where are there meaningful business problems that require experimentation, close contact with users, where there's an upside, where there's a way to show design data and technology can create sources of sustainable growth? Can you carve out a space for that? And then can you get teams going through the loop and demonstrating the outcomes on that? I think is really at the end of the day, it's not about digital transformation or agile transformation or product transformation or any of those. It's can you take back to I said product thinking is partially about honestly dollars and cents in a business sense. And you ask a lot of product owners in large organizations, what about the business angle? And like, oh, there's a PM for that. There's a business lead for that. No. Like, if you can't tell me how this will meaningfully impact revenue in the near term and the long term, do your homework, please do your homework. So find an area, get the business sense, try to create an area where that's going to create a good outcome for the company, and then try to apply the practices there is really what I'm thinking. I don't know if that answered the question, because like I said, I did kind of get distracted with him trying to climb into the car by himself, but then mom appeared.
The next one from Chancel. What are the most common challenges for organizations when shifting from X to, shifting from wherever to product thinking, and what helps them to overcome them? I think that was kind of answered. Florian's question was pretty same.
Let's go a little deeper. Funding models, budgeting models, and the number one way to move the needle is to partner with finance and create boundaries for different types of funding. At the end of the day, a lot of this is how efforts are funded and how someone puts stuff on the balance sheet. Right. CapEx and OpEx and how the teams are working. So that's my answer.
Awesome. I love this quick fire round there. Okay, so the next one would be, how can you best apply product thinking to multi-product companies that have contradicting goals?
Align the goals. You do not have 400 products. You go to a bank and they're like, we've got 400 products, checking account 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, A, B, C, D, E, and F, and mobile team 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. No human being out in the world thinks of their bank like that. So most of the times when I do these in large organizations, you get competing goals because they're shipping the org chart. And so that's how budgeting happens. That's how things happen. But when you think about it from the customer's perspective out in the world, I tried to shift my cable provider here in the United States, and the rep told me, create a new account. That way you'll get the discount. And I said, but you'll have 2 customer records for me. am I going to log in? She said, no, just always use your other one and a different password. You'll be fine. Talk about perverse incentives, right? So I understand that they exist in companies to do it, but I think you need to try to find the common ground between those groups when possible with a cohesive strategy is what you want to do.
All right, thank you. And then the last one we have is, do you have examples for companies that are successful in product living?
Yeah, I'll try to leave some links. Like I always look, here's something I realized. Take a 40,000 person company with 4,000 engineers and look at the speed of their quote unquote transformation. And I guarantee you, relative to their size, they're doing a pretty darn good job. It's just going to take a while. Because I know 2,000 person startups that can't change to save their life. So when I mentioned that before, Anheuser-Busch, this AB InBev that created this platform called CloudBees, for Anheuser-Busch, like to me, that's just a great story. It's in South America. They were doing a lot of like hand-to-hand distribution for their products. They thought about it. They thought, how can they create a new ecosystem there? You can look at like bees, this AB InBev thing. I think that's a great example, of a company doing that. Or, another customer of Amplitude's is Ford. Ford is doing a connected car initiative. So I kind of look for the pockets in companies versus saying that the whole company is doing well. Like there's almost certainly examples at everyone's company that you're at that are doing pretty well. So I would leave folks with that I think the problem is just size and inertia. And it's not going to take 1 year. It's going to take time relative to the size and inertia of the company.
Sure. Yeah, makes sense. Well, with that, we are at the end of all the questions. Thank you, John. Thank you very much for that excellent speech.
Yeah,
and
my pleasure.
For all your answers.
So check out the Miro board if you want, and always feel free to send me questions. And I think that basically my job says that if, it's a big company and you want me to come in and do a workshop or something like that, like just contact me. And usually there'll be some salesperson who'll be extremely excited that you've asked me to come and do a workshop. So we might maybe be able to work something out.
Awesome.
So,
yeah, that's a cool part. Keep that in mind. Yeah.
Cool. Awesome. Thank you so much. It was an honor to do it. And what an amazing community. I was just kind of looking at the board and things, and it's incredible what you're doing. It's very cool. So, all right. Talk to you soon.
Take care, John.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.